Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world of velvet drapes, low voices, and the faintest trace of incense curling through the air. You find yourself moving down a corridor lit by flickering oil lamps, their shadows dancing on painted walls that look like they've seen more secrets than any diary ever could. Already the air is heavy, perfumed with myrrh and roses, and every step feels like you're walking deeper into a dream you're not quite sure you're supposed to survive. In fact, you probably won't survive this, at least not with your reputation intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're tuning in from halfway across the world, drop your location and local time down below. I always love seeing where these late-night journeys reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open a heavy curtain, and suddenly you're inside. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation, as though everyone here has already agreed on some unspoken contract. What happens beyond these drapes never makes it back into daylight. The Romans, after all, had a flair for turning even private pleasure into public theatre. Imagine walking into a space where marble floors gleam with lamplight and silk couches line the walls, low enough for reclining, high enough to feel like a stage. The first thing you notice is how carefully everything has been arranged. Nothing here is accidental. The drapes are deep crimson, not only because red hides stains better than white, but also because crimson screamed wealth and status. Historians still argue whether some of these parties were as scandalous as poets later made them sound, or whether the poets were simply exaggerating for effect. But the setup alone, the velvet, the polished bronze mirrors, the scented oils, suggests that excess wasn't an accident. It was the point. Everywhere you look, whispers ripple across the room. People lean close, mouths brushing ears, as if secrets themselves are part of the entertainment. Invitations to these gatherings weren't handed out on wax tablets like any common feast. No, you had to be in the right circle, know the right gossip, or sometimes be dragged along by a patron who thought your presence would add sparkle, or scandal, to the night. It was a kind of lottery of reputation. You might leave elevated or ruined. One quirky detail you'd probably miss if you weren't paying attention. Some hosts deliberately placed squeaky floors or jangly wind chimes at the entrances to private alcoves, not just for decoration, but as a kind of doorbell. That way, anyone wandering into a tucked-away corner would be announced, intentionally or not. It's the Roman version of trying to sneak into the kitchen at midnight, but setting off the motion sensor light. And it's not just who's here, but who isn't. Imagine senators pretending they're too busy with speeches while secretly longing for an invite. Or philosophers scoffing in public yet showing up in disguise. Your eyes dart across the crowd, catching the glitter of a jeweled hairpin here, the gleam of a toga's golden border there. The Romans used clothing like neon signs, announcing rank and status, but in these velvet-draped rooms, sometimes masks and shadows mattered more than titles. Already, the sense of danger mixes with allure. This isn't a gladiatorial arena, but there's still a contest. Status versus secrecy, reputation versus indulgence. Some whisper that even emperors would occasionally show up incognito, hiding in plain sight just to see how their subjects behaved when they thought no imperial gaze was watching. Historians still debate whether those tales are political slander or tantalizing truth. But you, standing here with your back against the wall, can feel the tension crackle like static. The lamps flicker again, casting quicksilver reflections across bronze trays and polished glass cups. You take a cautious breath, but the air is too sweet, too perfumed, making your head swim just slightly. Was it always this intoxicating, or did the Romans deliberately design it that way? Some scholars believe the mix of scents, rose, cinnamon, frankincense, wasn't just to mask odors, but to dull judgment, loosen tongues, and coax you deeper into the night. And if you tilt your ear just right, you catch the faintest strains of music. Somewhere deeper in the villa, like the heartbeat of the evening. A lute plucks, a flute sighs, and someone claps along softly, testing the rhythm. It's not time yet for full performance, but the promise hangs there, just as heavy as the velvet curtains. For now, you stand in the doorway, half guest, half intruder, and you realize something. You've stepped into a world where time doesn't tick forward in neat hours, but stretches and bends around appetite. Tonight isn't about schedules. It's about surrender. And the longer you linger, the more the drapes seem to close behind you. sealing off any easy escape. You settle into the room more fully now, letting the hum of anticipation fade into the background as your attention shifts to the tables. Not ordinary tables, mind you. These are long, low slabs groaning beneath the weight of excess. And right there, commanding your senses before anything else, is the wine. Roman wine isn't like the glass you might pour for yourself on a weeknight. First off, it's strong, shockingly so. The ancient vintages could be so potent that drinking it straight was considered barbaric. Instead, pitchers of water stand ready, waiting to be mixed in. You scoop some into a cup, watching as the deep red thins into a softer blush. The practice isn't about health so much as ritual. In Roman eyes, to drink undiluted wine was to reject civility itself. And here, image is everything. The first sip is tart, almost resinous, because Roman winemakers sometimes cut their brew with pine sap or herbs. It's nothing like the smooth blends lining a modern wine shelf. Yet once it hits your stomach, you feel why it became the oil that greased Rome's social machine. Wine wasn't just a drink, it was conversation starter, truth serum, and currency of hospitality rolled into one. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. Some Romans used seawater in their wine mixtures, claiming it gave the drink a bracing tang and longer shelf life. Imagine bringing that to a modern dinner party. Try this Cabernet. It's been seasoned with a splash of the Mediterranean. Half your guests would walk out. The other half would ask for seconds. Historians still argue whether those salty concoctions were actually popular or just eccentric experiments from a handful of adventurous vintners. The amphorae, those tall clay jars, stand lined against the wall, each marked with symbols telling you where the wine came from. Falernian, the most famous, was aged for decades and prized like treasure. Tonight, though, the hosts aren't serving just the elite vintages. They're pouring freely, almost recklessly, because abundance itself is the flex. It's not about taste. It's about proof that the villa's cellar is bottomless. You recline on a cushioned couch, balancing your cup, and notice the rhythm of serving. Slaves drift in and out like shadows, refilling cups before they even empty. No one here needs to raise a hand. The wine just keeps appearing, endless, like rivers feeding a lake. You half expect a tap to spring out of the wall. The conversation around you starts to loosen, voices climbing higher, laughter spilling more easily. That's the point. In Roman philosophy, at least in the Epicurean corner, wine wasn't indulgence for its own sake. It was a pathway to letting guards down, dissolving the stiffness of rank and politics. A senator reclining next to a poet suddenly feels less like a ruler, more like a comrade. Until tomorrow, when they'll probably deny ever sitting side by side. One of the guests nearby raises his cup and makes a cheeky toast. To forgetting tomorrow's debts tonight. A ripple of laughter answers him, and for a moment you feel the group's collective exhale, as though everyone agrees to set the world outside aside. But excess comes with risk. Romans had a whole cultural vocabulary for drunkenness, from light buzz to full collapse. The line between charmingly loose-tongued and humiliatingly sloppy was razor thin. And unlike at a frat party, here humiliation could follow you into the Senate, onto the battlefield, even into history books. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author, once warned about hosts mixing too little water, claiming it led to chaos. Historians still debate whether those warnings were exaggerations or genuine cautionary tales. You can almost feel that edge of danger in your own hand, the cup growing lighter every time you sip. The wine warms your chest, loosens your shoulders, but you're not blind to its trick. You've heard of hosts who deliberately spiked the mix with herbs, not just pine or seawater, but stranger ingredients, meant to stir desire or, more cynically, cloud judgment. It's the ancient equivalent of slipping a mystery shot into someone's cocktail. And yet, for all the risk, the mood is irresistible. Cups clink, conversation weaves into song, and you catch the faint shimmer of spilled wine pooling on the marble floor, gleaming like a second set of lamps. Someone spills deliberately, laughing, because for once in Roman life, waste is celebrated. To leave the table spotless would almost insult the host, as though the abundance weren't enough to overflow. There's an almost hypnotic cycle to it. Pour, sip, laugh, lean closer, repeat. The rhythm of wine sets the rhythm of the night. Without it, the velvet drapes and perfumed halls might feel staged, brittle, lifeless. With it, everything hums, everything flows. There's an almost hypnotic cycle to it. Pour, sip, laugh, lean closer, repeat. The rhythm of wine sets the rhythm of the night. Without it, the velvet drapes and perfumed halls might feel staged, brittle, lifeless. With it, everything hums, everything flows, and as you tilt back your cup once more, you notice your neighbor's grin widen. Whether it's the wine talking or the night itself, you can't quite tell. But either way, you're in now, carried along on a current that shows no sign of stopping. The wine has taken the edge off, and now your focus drifts naturally to the food. Or perhaps it's impossible not to notice. The tables themselves groan beneath the weight of it. The Romans never half committed to a feast. They treated banquets like battlefields, only with bread rolls instead of swords. You recline back on your couch and let your gaze wander, the smells tugging at your senses one by one. First, the meats. Not your everyday chicken drumsticks or beef cuts, but exotic showpieces. A whole roasted peacock stands tall, feathers reattached after cooking, so it looks both alive and edible at once. You swear its glassy eye sockets follow you. Right beside it, a platter of dormice. Yes, dormice, stuffed with minced pork and pine nuts. Romans adored them as delicacies, raising them in special clay jars called gliraria. You imagine trying to explain that snack to a modern dinner guest. Don't worry, they're free-range. Historians still argue whether dormice were reserved for the elite or actually popped up at middle-class tables too. Everywhere you look, dishes gleam under dripping honey glaze. Figs split open like jewels, their insides sticky and glittering with sesame. Trays of oysters sit on crushed ice hauled in from mountain snow, proof that Roman logistics could rival Amazon Prime in determination, if not speed. And scattered between them, bowls of garum, the infamous fish sauce that clings to the air with an unmistakable funk. A single splash flavors everything, from meat to fruit, though you can't help thinking it smells like a sailor's laundry left too long in the sun. You reach for a slice of bread, but even that's no simple loaf. Roman bakers sometimes scored political messages into the crust, turning food into edible propaganda. Imagine buttering your toast in the morning, only to find a campaign slogan baked into it. Tonight, though, the bread seems blissfully free of slogans. One quirky detail catches your eye: platters of fruit sprinkled with ground pepper. Yes, pepper. Romans adored the contrast of sweet and spicy. Grapes, pears, even melons, dusted with the black flakes imported all the way from India. It's the kind of flavor combination that makes you pause mid-bite, wondering whether it's genius or just a culinary dare. The servants move with practiced choreography, swapping empty trays for fresh ones before you even notice. You can tell this isn't their first performance. The Romans didn't treat banquets as a time to simply eat. They turned them into theater. The food itself acted as both scenery and script. Of course, you know the danger of excess. Nausea. Roman writers loved to joke about partygoers sneaking off to vomit so they could come back for more. The infamous vomitorium myth, though, is a bit of a misunderstanding. No, there weren't actual special rooms designed for puking. It was the name of the passageways in amphitheaters where crowds vomited out into the streets. Still, that doesn't mean no one ever dashed behind a curtain after one too many peacock legs. Historians still debate how common deliberate overindulgence was, but satire makes it clear the stereotype stuck. The flavors layer in your mouth: savory meats glazed with honey, fruit sharp with vinegar, cheese mellowing everything out. And then dessert arrives, though dessert in Roman terms doesn't mean cake with frosting. Instead, honey cakes baked with poppy seeds, dates stuffed with almonds, and fresh fruit baskets piled higher than a modern Instagram influencer's brunch spread. You take a cautious bite of the honey cake. It's dense, chewy, and just sweet enough to pull you forward into another. The honey clings to your teeth, and for a fleeting moment you feel the simple pleasure beneath all the spectacle. Maybe that's the trick. Beneath the roasted birds and exotic spices, food is still the anchor of the night. The one indulgence that needs no explanation. Somewhere across the table, someone cracks a joke about how more food has been wasted tonight than most farmers see in a year. The laughter is light, but the truth behind it lingers. Banquets weren't just about appetite. They were about showing that appetite could be fed endlessly. Abundance itself became the entertainment. Your stomach, though, starts to hint that you're near capacity. You shift on the couch, loosen the tie of your tunic, and watch as the feast keeps flowing without pause. For the Romans, moderation wasn't the goal. Display was. And tonight, display is endless. You catch yourself staring at the peacock again, its feathers catching the lamplight like a crown. Maybe tomorrow you'll laugh at the absurdity, but tonight it feels strangely fitting. A bird turned into both meal and monument. And with that last thought, you reach again for your wine, because really, what else can you do but wash it all down? Your stomach is full, your head pleasantly buzzing, and yet the night refuses to pause. As the banquet dishes disappear, another wave of sensation rolls in. Scent. At first you think it's just more incense, but then you notice the subtle differences. One servant drifts past, carrying a bronze bowl of rose petals steeped in oil, sprinkling drops onto the air like invisible confetti. Another kneels beside a reclining guest, massaging scented oil into their shoulders until the skin gleams in the lamplight. The Romans didn't settle for food and wine alone. They wanted every sense engaged, pampered, overwhelmed. You inhale deeply and catch layers: sharp frankincense, earthy myrrh, musky spikenard, and, beneath it all, the heavy sweetness of rose. It's the olfactory equivalent of mixing 5 different perfumes at once, but somehow it works. The scent isn't just about pleasure. It's camouflage, too. After all, with all the bodies pressed together, a little help in the smell department doesn't hurt. One quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some Romans believed that rubbing themselves with oil of saffron could keep them glowing in the lamplight, while others swore by cinnamon oil as a mood booster. It's the ancient version of debating whether coconut or lavender lotion makes you look more radiant. Historians still argue whether these oils were purely cosmetic or whether some carried ritual or even medicinal weight. Either way, you can't deny the effect. A slave approaches you now, silent as shadow, holding out a small alabaster jar. You dip your fingers inside and find it thick, golden, with the consistency of warm honey. As you rub it across your forearm, the oil shimmers, leaving your skin slick and glowing like polished marble. You glance around and realize every guest carries that same sheen. Under lamplight, the whole party looks almost otherworldly, as though the people themselves are becoming part of the decor. It's not just the oils, there are powders too. Crushed minerals dust the cheeks of certain guests, giving them a faint shimmer of silver or gold. Someone else nearby wears a crown of laurel leaves dipped in perfume, the scent drifting every time they nod or laugh. A senator with a stiff reputation in daylight now looks like he belongs in a costume drama, his forehead gleaming as though stage-lit, and then there's the sweat. Because let's be honest, even in luxury, people are people. The villa is warm, the crowd is dense, and beneath the perfumes you catch the salt of exertion. But the Romans didn't shy away from that either. Sweat, in their view, wasn't just unavoidable. It was evidence of vitality, energy, even attractiveness. Some hosts supposedly collected oil and sweat from gladiators after matches, selling it as an aphrodisiac. Imagine bottling gym towels and marketing them as luxury skincare. Historians still debate whether anyone genuinely used it, or whether it was just another layer of satirical exaggeration. You shift on your couch, feeling the oil still slick on your arm, and realize how the sensory overload is working on you. The scents blur thought, the glow of skin under lamps blurs identity, and soon you're not just a guest observing, you're part of the living, breathing tapestry. The host knew exactly what they were doing: drown the senses, erase the boundaries. One guest leans toward you, their perfume sharp with jasmine, and murmurs a joke you don't quite catch but laugh at anyway. That's the magic of the moment. Clarity isn't required. The softness of the oils, the heaviness of the perfumes, the faint stick of honey still clinging to your lips from dessert. All of it melds into a haze where logic takes a nap. And so, as the air thickens with both sweat and roses, you realize the Romans weren't chasing comfort so much as transformation. They wanted to become different creatures for the night, glistening, perfumed, half divine under the watchful gaze of flickering lamps. You lean back, the couch absorbing your weight, and let yourself glow with the rest of them. After all, tonight isn't about restraint. It's about shining, sweating, and slipping further into a dream that feels less and less like something you'll ever wake from. The glow of oil and the heaviness of perfume have made the room shimmer, and now another layer unfurls: sound. At first it's subtle, like the hum of a beehive in the distance. Then it swells, until you realize the music has been hiding there all along, creeping closer with each heartbeat. A pair of musicians step forward, their tunics loose, their fingers already dancing across strings. One plucks a cithara, a kind of harp-like instrument, while the other coaxes long lilting sighs from a wooden flute. Together, they build a backdrop that is neither loud nor shy. It's the sort of rhythm that seeps into your bones, nudging your body to sway without your permission. The Romans understood that music was more than entertainment. It was atmosphere control. Imagine trying to keep a party lively without a playlist. For them, the musicians were the playlist. The tempo shifts as the wine flows, slower and hypnotic at first, then gradually quickening, daring you to match it. Some scholars suggest music at these gatherings wasn't only about mood, but about timing. Cues that signaled when it was appropriate to recline, when to toast, and when to slip into riskier entertainments. Historians still argue whether these cues were formalized or simply improvised, but either way, you feel the subtle tug. One quirky detail tickles your ears. The percussion isn't drums, but hand claps and the jingle of crotala, small bronze castanets. A slave in the corner claps in perfect rhythm, his face unreadable, as though the beat itself belongs to the house and not to him. Another sways a little too enthusiastically, and a guest nearby laughs, tossing him a fig as a reward. It's absurd and endearing at once. Then come the voices. At first, just humming, guests joining the melody under their breath. Then a woman across the room begins to sing, her voice clear but unpolished, like someone humming in a kitchen when they think no one's listening. The others encourage her with smiles, and suddenly she's part of the performance, her song weaving through the flute like a ribbon of sound. You can't help but tap your finger against the couch, syncing with the rhythm. Music wasn't just backdrop. It was often a test. Guests might be nudged to recite poetry to a beat or to improvise verses that match the melody. Fail, and you risk ridicule. Succeed, and your wit might earn you prestige that lasted longer than the hangover. Tonight, someone slurs their lines, and the crowd erupts in good-natured laughter, the kind that both stings and bonds. You lean into it, realizing how the sound shapes your perception. Without it, the velvet drapes might feel heavy, oppressive. With it, they flutter in your imagination, alive with possibility. The oil lamps flicker in rhythm with the lute's strings, and even the shadows on the wall seem to dance. The host rises briefly, claps twice, and suddenly the tempo shifts again. Faster now, playful, almost mischievous. Guests respond instinctively, laughter rising, conversations bubbling louder. It's as if the music has its hand on everyone's pulse, squeezing, releasing, squeezing again. You wonder how long the musicians have been trained for this, to become invisible conductors of emotion, and just when you think you've grown used to it, a new sound joins. The aulos, a double-piped reed instrument. Its twin tones weave together like two voices arguing and embracing all at once. The effect is slightly dissonant, slightly intoxicating, like standing too close to a strobe light. You feel your chest vibrate with it, and suddenly the wine in your veins seems to quicken. One guest nearby mutters something half-serious. The gods dance with us tonight. You catch the twinkle in their eye, but you also hear the sincerity. For Romans, music wasn't just pleasure. It bordered on the divine. Bacchus, god of wine, was often pictured surrounded by flutes and cymbals, his revels impossible without sound. Historians still debate whether music here was meant to invoke the gods explicitly or just to mimic their imagined parties. Either way, the room has tipped into something sacred, or at least sacredly chaotic. You take another sip of your watered wine and find it harder to sit still. The rhythm insists, the flutes persuade, the voices carry you along. Soon, you're not a guest observing. You're part of the orchestra, one more instrument in the night's performance, and in that realization, you smile because it's clear now. The music never sleeps, and neither will you. Not while the flutes keep breathing and the strings keep pulling at your bones. Your fingers are still drumming against the couch when the music quiets, and something else takes over. Laughter mixed with the clatter of dice. Across the room, a group leans over a low table, their cups of wine forgotten for the moment, eyes fixed on small ivory cubes tumbling across polished wood. You ease closer, curiosity tugging you like gravity. Romans loved games, not just for fun, but as subtle battlegrounds for status, luck, and boldness. Tonight, the favorites are dice games. You watch as the cubes bounce, roll, and come to rest, one man cursing his rotten fortune, while the woman beside him erupts in a victorious cheer. Her winnings? A bracelet tossed onto the table moments earlier, gleaming in lamplight. You crouch low, watching the tension simmer. These aren't penny stakes. Guests gamble jewelry, expensive cloaks, even promises of favors. One quirky tidbit: there are stories of Romans wagering entire slaves on a single throw. Imagine treating human lives like poker chips. It's as disturbing as it is revealing of their social mindset. Historians still argue whether those stories are exaggerated, moralizing tales, or true glimpses of reckless indulgence. The game shifts, and someone introduces Aliyah, a dice contest where different combinations carry playful nicknames. Venus for the luckiest roll, Canis for the most pitiful. When someone hits Venus, the table erupts like a stadium crowd. Wine sloshes, hands clap, and the unlucky groan as their wagers slide across the wood. But dice aren't the only amusements. You notice another circle nearby playing a truth or dare style game, except their dares lean towards scandal. A young poet is dared to recite a risque couplet about the host's new marble statue, and though he blushes crimson, he complies. The crowd howls with approval, and you realize these dares aren't just jokes, they're rehearsals in boldness, a way to prove who dares to tiptoe along the edge of respectability. Another guest proposes riddles, teasing the group with wordplay sharp enough to draw groans and applause in equal measure. Romans adored cleverness, often prizing a witty riddle as much as a lucky dice roll. In this world, your tongue can be as valuable as your fortune. The tension escalates when a nobleman loses round after round, his cloak now resting in the pile of wagers. He forces a grin, but you sense the humiliation biting. Here's the paradox: what's just a game tonight might haunt him tomorrow. A senator who loses too much not only risks his bracelet, but his reputation for self-control. And in Rome, reputation can be currency or catastrophe. One of the slaves refills cups, and you notice him watching the dice with hidden intensity. He has no voice in the game, but his eyes follow every roll, as if imagining outcomes he'll never touch. It makes you wonder, who actually plays with the higher stakes? The noble who can shrug off a loss, or the servant who has everything to gain yet nothing to bet? Someone suggests raising the ante with a joke. Loser must sing a hymn to Bacchus while hopping on one foot. The room bursts into laughter, and soon the nobleman, cheeks red from wine and shame, is wobbling like a lopsided goat, croaking a half-forgotten hymn while others clap in rhythm. You laugh too, not just at him, but at the way the night shifts so easily between high stakes and utter silliness. The Romans understood that games weren't distractions, they were rituals of exposure. They tested courage, wit, luck, and composure. Winning earned applause, losing invited ridicule, but both drew you deeper into the communal pulse. As the dice tumble again, you realize you're caught in the rhythm. The music still hums faintly in the background, blending with the roll and clatter, the laughter and groans. Together, they form a soundtrack of risk and release. A reminder that for the Romans, indulgence wasn't passive, it was active, playful, dangerous. And as the cubes skitter across the table one more time, everyone leans in, breath held, waiting to see whose fortune will rise, and whose will collapse with a single unlucky toss. The dice still clatter somewhere behind you, but now your attention is pulled toward a new spectacle. Guests begin slipping thin masks over their faces, painted wood, molded wax, even delicate linen stiffened with resin. Suddenly, the familiar becomes unfamiliar. The senator who lost his cloak earlier now hides behind a grinning comedy mask, and the poet wears a tragic frown, his eyes barely visible through the slits. Masks, in Roman culture, weren't just costume pieces. They carried echoes of the theatre, where actors exaggerated expression so audiences in massive amphitheatres could read their emotions from far away. To wear one at a banquet was to borrow that theatrical magic, to step into a role, to blur the line between guest and character. Tonight, the villa feels less like a gathering and more like a stage. You accept a mask when a servant offers it, its surface cool against your fingertips. When you raise it to your face, the world changes instantly. Your vision narrows through the eye holes, your voice echoes oddly in your own ears, and you realize anonymity is intoxicating. No one quite knows who is who anymore, and with that uncertainty comes boldness. A quirky tidbit: some wealthy Romans supposedly scented their masks before wearing them, rubbing the inside with rose oil so that their breath would mingle with fragrance instead of stale wine. Imagine cologne for your disguise. Historians still argue whether masks at private parties were as common as satirists claimed, or whether later writers exaggerated their presence to highlight decadence. Either way, the symbolism is too perfect to ignore. The games shift under this new atmosphere. Conversations grow riskier, jokes sharper, flirtations bolder. The woman beside you leans closer, her mask painted with a sly half-smile, and whispers something you don't quite catch. But it doesn't matter. You respond with laughter because the mask makes you fearless, safe behind anonymity. In one corner, a group stages a mock play, each donning masks of tragedy, comedy, or grotesque exaggeration. They improvise scenes, parodying politics, mocking neighbors, even hinting at scandalous rumors about the emperor himself. In daylight, such jokes could cost lives. Behind masks, they become entertainment. You wonder how much of this is genuinely daring and how much is carefully calculated performance. The lamplight glances off painted features, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. The faces are frozen, always smiling, always frowning, always gaping. It's both amusing and unsettling, as if the room is populated not by guests, but by spirits who never blink. You notice something else. The masks aren't only hiding, they're revealing. Freed from their own reputations, people reveal sides they'd never dare show otherwise. The shy poet suddenly roars with confidence, while the usually brash nobleman hangs back, uncertain, his tragic mask too heavy to shrug off. It's as though the wood and wax bring hidden truths to the surface. A guest nearby lifts their mask just slightly, revealing a mischievous grin before dropping it back into place. It's a small gesture, but it reminds you, the power of the mask isn't in hiding completely, it's in controlling the reveal. Who sees the real you, and when, becomes a game in itself. The laughter grows louder, the gestures wilder, and the villa seems to dissolve into a blur of painted expressions and echoing voices. At some point, you catch your reflection in a polished bronze tray. For a heartbeat, you don't recognize yourself. And maybe that's the point. Historians still debate whether these masquerades were common fixtures of Roman parties or rare indulgences reserved for the most experimental hosts. But standing here, oil still slick on your skin, wine humming in your veins, mask pressed firmly against your face, you don't much care. What matters is the freedom it brings, the delicious weightlessness of shedding your identity. And so, behind the grinning facade, you lean back into the couch, letting yourself laugh louder, whisper bolder, and slip deeper into the performance. Tonight, you are whoever you want to be, and no one, not even you, knows for sure where the mask ends and the person begins. The room is alive with laughter and the flicker of masked faces, but as you glance around, you notice something else. The walls themselves seem to watch. Murals and frescoes cover the plaster, scenes painted in vivid reds and ochres. Everywhere you look, gods stare back. Bacchus with his ivy crown and wine cup, Venus lounging nude on a seashell, satyrs chasing nymphs through leafy groves. You pause, a little unsettled. It's one thing to party with senators and poets. It's another to feel like the divine audience has front row seats. The Romans weren't shy about decorating their homes with mythological scenes, often ones chosen to reflect the theme of the gathering. Tonight, Bacchus dominates. His wide eyes, painted centuries ago, seem to twinkle in the lamplight as if he approves of the chaos unfolding beneath him. One quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found frescoes in Pompeii showing not just gods in their usual glory, but also gods in humorous or downright scandalous poses, like Priapus weighing his comically oversized manhood against a sack of gold. A reminder that wealth and virility went hand in hand in Roman imagination. Imagine explaining that to your dinner guests. Oh yes, that's just Priapus, patron of, abundance. Historians still argue whether such images were taken seriously as religious devotion or were meant primarily as cheeky decoration. The music softens for a moment, and you can almost hear the whisper of the gods through the painted vines and stone temples. The imagery isn't accidental. By surrounding themselves with these figures, the hosts create a sense of divine sanction, as though Bacchus himself has poured the wine and Venus herself has perfumed the room. Pleasure becomes ritual, indulgence becomes worship. You run your hand along the plaster, the paint rough beneath your fingertips, and wonder, are these gods watching in judgment or celebration? For the Romans, the line was blurry. A festival in Bacchus's honor could involve ecstatic dancing and wild abandon, while Venus's rites often blurred the sacred and the sensual. The presence of their images tonight suggests the same principle. What might seem scandalous in daylight becomes sacred under divine patronage. The masks around you suddenly feel less like disguises and more like offerings, temporary roles donned in honor of the gods. A guest raises their cup toward a fresco of Venus and murmurs a toast, half sincere, half daring. Another kneels dramatically before Bacchus, making the crowd laugh, but also eliciting a few nods of approval. It's theater, yes, but it's also ritual play, and then your gaze lands on a smaller painting tucked between the grander scenes, a satyr holding up a mirror to a mortal guest. The detail is striking, almost prophetic. You glance down at the polished bronze tray on the table and see your own reflection staring back. For a moment, the line between mortal and myth blurs. Are you merely a guest or part of the story unfolding on these walls? Historians still debate whether Romans believed the gods truly participated in these banquets or whether invoking them was just a convenient excuse for excess. But you feel the power of the imagery regardless. The gods' eyes follow, their painted smiles approving, or mocking, as you raise your cup once again. The laughter around you swells, the music picks up, and the walls seem to pulse with life. Bacchus raises his eternal cup, Venus reclines eternally beautiful, and you, smeared with oil, masked in anonymity, tipsy on endless wine, become part of their eternal feast. You lean back, letting the gods watch, deciding that whether they bless or condemn, you'll never quite know. And maybe that's the thrill. The gods on the walls keep their painted vigil, but if you really look, you notice that the true orchestrators of the night aren't the laughing guests or the statuesque hosts. They're the ones moving quietly between couches, pouring wine, fetching trays, dabbing sweat, and lighting lamps. The slaves, the silent stagehands. Without them, the spectacle collapses. The amphorae don't refill themselves, the garlands don't hang in perfect arcs, and the wax doesn't melt evenly in its bronze dishes. You watch one servant bend to sweep away crumbs with a feather brush, while another replaces a fruit platter before it even looks half empty. Their efficiency is almost invisible, but that's the point. Perfection means not being noticed at all. The Romans considered this seamless labor part of luxury. To recline in effortless abundance, someone else had to move like clockwork in the shadows. One quirky tidbit: some wealthy Romans supposedly dressed their serving slaves in miniature versions of their master's clothing, tiny togas and tunics, as a kind of visual joke and status flex. Imagine hosting a party today and hiring staff to dress like you just to emphasize how replaceable they are. Historians still argue whether those outfits were common practice or a satirical exaggeration by moralizing writers. You catch the eyes of one young servant as he leans forward to pour your wine. For just a second, his gaze is direct, almost defiant, before he lowers it again. You wonder what it's like to move through these nights unseen, to know every secret and scandal, but never be acknowledged. Tomorrow's gossip in the city might trace back not to drunken senators, but to sharp-eared slaves who carried whispers beyond these walls. A tray wobbles, a cup nearly spills, and a guest snaps impatiently, waving the servant away as though he were a clumsy piece of furniture. The laughter resumes instantly, the incident already forgotten by everyone except the servant himself. You can't help but feel the imbalance. For the guests, the night is performance and indulgence. For the servants, it's endurance. Still, there's a strange power in invisibility. Servants see everything: the dice games, the masked confessions, the whispered affairs. Their silence is both expected and dangerous. If even one decided to talk, half the room could be ruined by morning. Historians still debate how much influence slaves had in shaping Roman reputation, but the evidence of gossip and scandal traced to household staff suggests they weren't powerless. You notice, too, the physical toll. Sweat beads along their hairlines, their hands chapped from oil lamps and amphora handles. And yet, they glide, always smiling, always bowing, always anticipating needs before anyone speaks them aloud. They are the invisible current keeping the night afloat. The irony strikes you. While the guests wear masks to conceal themselves, the servants wear no masks at all, yet they are the least visible people in the room. Their true selves are hidden not by wood or wax, but by social structure itself. The music swells again, guests cheer, and another round of wine is poured. You sip, reclining, but part of you keeps watching the shadows move, the tireless arms that refill, the feet that shuffle quietly across marble. the backs that bend again and again, and as the laughter rises, you realize, without them, there would be no velvet drapes, no perfumed oils, no endless wine. The party depends on their silence, and their silence may be the loudest truth of all. The shadows slip away again, leaving you back among the glittering crowd. And now, with the candles high and the wine thicker in your veins, you start noticing the clothing. Or rather, the way clothing seems less about comfort and more about theater. Fashion here isn't just style, it's seduction armor. A senator nearby adjusts his toga, layers of fine wool draped so carefully that it looks casual, though you suspect his attendants spent half an hour arranging it. Roman togas weren't simple sheets. They were massive semicircles of cloth that had to be folded just right to signal rank and dignity. Tonight, though, dignity is paired with indulgence. The folds spill open a little more than usual, revealing gleaming jewelry and perfumed skin. On the couches, women display silks imported from the East, light, shimmering fabrics that cling in ways Roman conservatives once scolded as scandalous. You let your fingers brush the edge of one scarf. It's so thin it could almost dissolve in your palm. A quirky tidbit. Pliny the Elder once grumbled that a pound of silk was worth its weight in gold, which made senators wearing it look as if naked. Not exactly the compliment you'd want on your outfit. Historians still argue whether silk was truly that common in Rome, or whether writers exaggerated to critique luxury. Jewelry gleams everywhere. Necklaces of pearls, bracelets stacked in jingling rows, rings set with carved gemstones. Some guests flaunt miniature cameos of gods and emperors, as if carrying divine approval on their pinky fingers. One woman twirls her bracelet idly while talking, and the gold glitters like a sunbeam against her oiled arm. You notice men, too, dressing not just in power, but in allure. Tunics dyed deep crimson or Tyrian purple announce wealth, while carefully groomed hair and neatly trimmed beards show the hours spent in barbershops. A young poet nearby has even dusted his face with powder to brighten his complexion, a practice some Romans whispered about but secretly admired. You smirk, realizing beauty routines aren't such a modern invention after all. The air smells of fabrics as much as perfume, lanolin from wool, faint spice from imported dyes, even a hint of vinegar used in laundry to keep colors bright. You take in the textures as people brush past. Rough toga edges against smooth silk scarves. The cool weight of metal jewelry against heated skin. And then there are the sandals. Some guests wear simple leather straps, while others sport footwear inlaid with bronze studs or dyed in flashy hues. Every detail speaks. Every detail seduces. What fascinates you most is the way clothing doubles as communication. A senator loosens his toga folds slightly, signaling he's ready to relax formality. A woman adjusts her veil, dropping it lower as the night grows bolder. A poet drapes a shawl dramatically, inviting glances. These aren't accidents. They're moves in a silent dance. Historians still debate how much guests dressed down versus dressed up for private banquets, especially ones rumored to drift into scandal. Some sources suggest people eventually abandoned heavy garments altogether in favor of comfort, while others insist that luxury fabrics were flaunted to the very end. Watching this crowd, you suspect the answer is both. Clothing starts as spectacle, then slips away as wine and night wear on. You catch your reflection again, this time in the polished surface of a silver bowl. Oil on your skin, mask still crooked, clothing rumpled. You realize you've been transformed too, even if your outfit isn't worth its weight in gold. The room is a fashion show, a battlefield of fabrics, and you've been drafted without even knowing it. And yet, as laughter ripples and bracelets jingle, you can't help but admire the spectacle. The Romans understood something timeless. Clothing isn't just covering. It's invitation. It's story. It's armor. You sip your wine, wondering which fabric will slide to the floor first, and whether it will be by accident or by design. The shimmer of silk and the weight of pearls continue to dazzle you. But the night is never content with one performance. As you lean back, half hidden in your mask, your ears prick up at a cluster of whispers drifting across the room. They're not about the wine, nor the games, nor even the fashion. They're about the guests, the forbidden ones. Every great Roman party seems to attract more than its official guest list. You notice a ripple of attention when a broad-shouldered man enters the atrium. He isn't dressed like the senators, nor perfumed like the poets. His tunic is simpler, but the scars etched across his arms tell their own story. A gladiator, perhaps. His presence is both thrilling and dangerous. For gladiators were adored in public arenas but considered scandalous companions in private rooms. Nearby, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue whispers into a friend's ear. You catch fragments. "That's him," the poet Juvenal mocked. "Senator's wife." The words twist into speculation, half true and half imagined. The gossip alone is intoxicating, like another round of wine poured straight into your bloodstream. A quirky tidbit. Some records suggest that even emperors sometimes entertained actors, gladiators, or other socially unsuitable companions at their feasts, despite laws discouraging it. Imagine if your country's leader threw a state dinner and invited a professional wrestler and a stand-up comedian as surprise guests. Historians still argue whether these stories were truth or slander, gossip spun by enemies to discredit the powerful. You notice the way the forbidden guests carry themselves. They seem both at ease and on edge, knowing that their presence is both desired and dangerous. One gladiator laughs too loudly, his voice cutting above the music, and several nobles turn to glance, not in disapproval, but with thinly veiled fascination. After all, the man's fame in the arena is a kind of currency here. To sit beside him is to brush against danger, to feel the thrill of blood and dust without leaving your couch. And then there are the politicians. Those who officially shouldn't be here. A senator's son sneaks through a side door, his cloak pulled high, though everyone recognizes him instantly. You smirk at the futility of secrecy when every servant in the villa will recount his arrival by morning. Still, there's a charge in pretending. You feel it yourself, the thrill of sitting in a room where boundaries blur. The respectable and the scandalous breathe the same perfumed air, drink the same watered wine, laugh at the same jokes. The masks help, but even without them, the night insists. Here, everyone belongs, at least until dawn. Whispers dart around like moths to flame. Is that her? I thought he was exiled. Didn't she take a vow of chastity? Each rumor adds to the spectacle. The truth almost doesn't matter. The performance of speculation is entertainment enough. Historians still debate whether these feasts were truly inclusive of every class or whether writers exaggerated to shock their audiences. The archaeology of Pompeii and Herculaneum hints at mixing, but not proof. Yet standing here, watching nobles and gladiators share a bowl of figs, you believe it. The forbidden guest is the spice, the scandal that makes the evening memorable. The music swells, laughter rises, and you catch yourself leaning in, hungry for the next reveal. Who else might walk through the door? A rival politician? A wandering philosopher? Someone even more shocking? And then you realize you too are a forbidden guest. You don't belong here, not among the silks and the senators, not under Bacchus's painted gaze. And yet, here you are, drinking their wine, listening to their whispers, joining their scandal. You sip deeply, settling into the delicious wrongness of it all. Because sometimes the sweetest indulgence isn't the food or the wine, it's the company you're not supposed to keep. The whispers about forbidden guests still hum in your ears, but before you can lean too far into the gossip, you hear a different sound, a voice pitched not in secrecy, but in grand, deliberate rhetoric. You glance over and see a small circle forming near the fountain, where a man in a plain tunic waves a fig in one hand as if it were a philosopher's scroll. A philosopher at a Roman party, because, of course. You shuffle closer and catch the cadence of his words. Something about virtue, self-control, and the fleeting nature of desire. He's quoting Stoic wisdom, reminding anyone who will listen that indulgence leads only to weakness. It's a brave thing to say in a villa where the wine flows like rivers and the air smells of roses and sweat. But before the room grows too solemn, another figure cuts in, this one laughing, crumbs of honeyed almonds clinging to his beard. An Epicurean, no doubt, eager to remind the circle that pleasure itself can be a kind of wisdom, that savoring life's sweetness is a form of philosophy in action. The two men go back and forth, using fruit as props, turning the villa into a debating hall. But before the room grows too solemn, another figure cuts in, this one laughing, crumbs of honeyed almonds clinging to his beard. An Epicurean, no doubt, eager to remind the circle that pleasure itself can be a kind of wisdom, that savoring life's sweetness is a form of philosophy in action. The two men go back and forth, using fruit as props, turning the villa into a debating hall. A quirky tidbit. Cicero once mocked philosophers who preached simplicity by day but attended lavish feasts by night, pointing out that nothing spoiled moral authority faster than a mouth sticky with honeycakes. Historians still argue whether Roman banquets often included such philosophical sparring, or whether later writers embellished these encounters for satire. But the image fits too well: the eternal clash of ideals staged right between roasted peacocks and amphorae of wine. You can't help but chuckle. The Stoic insists that true pleasure comes from virtue, while the Epicurean insists that virtue is pointless without a little pleasure. Meanwhile, the crowd nods at whichever point flatters their current mood. One senator claps loudly for the Stoic, only to grab another goblet of wine the moment the Epicurean speaks. Consistency isn't exactly the strong suit tonight. The debate grows animated. The Stoic slams his fig on the marble table to make a point about discipline, while the Epicurean counters by plucking a grape from a passing tray and popping it into his mouth with exaggerated relish. The audience laughs, claps, and shouts for more, and yet, beneath the humor, there's a real tension. The Romans were always torn between restraint and excess, between admiration for stern old virtues and hunger for dazzling new luxuries. Tonight, that battle plays out not in laws or wars, but in almond crumbs and wine stains. You realize something, though. The philosophers themselves seem to enjoy the attention more than the purity of their arguments. The Stoic's frown softens every time the crowd cheers, and the Epicurean's laugh grows louder the more figs are tossed his way. Philosophy here is entertainment, another flavor on the banquet table. Historians still debate whether these feasts corrupted philosophy or whether philosophy gave banquets a kind of intellectual excuse. But as you watch the Epicurean lick honey from his fingers while declaring pleasure the highest good, you suspect the second explanation won't hold much water, or wine. The crowd disperses slowly, still chuckling, still quoting the best lines back and forth. You lean back amused. Even wisdom in Rome has to perform. And tonight, philosophy wears a toga stained with grape juice and a grin as wide as Bacchus's painted smile. The echo of the philosopher's debate lingers like the aftertaste of too strong wine. But the villa has already shifted again. The laughter is lower now, quieter, as if everyone suddenly remembers that by sunrise they must return to lives ruled by reputation and law. Outward respectability, inward abandon, the double life of Rome. You recline, mask slipping slightly, and notice the subtle choreography. When servants pass too close or unfamiliar eyes wander the hall, the laughter tones down, garments adjust, conversation pivots to safer ground. A senator loudly praises the emperor's latest decree, even as he keeps his hand clasped tightly around a companion's wrist under the table. A matron talks of virtue with her voice, but her jewelry tells stories of lavish gifts from someone other than her husband. It is a delicate balance. Roman society demanded appearances of dignity, but these nights offered a sanctioned escape, at least in theory. One quirky tidbit: some Romans even constructed secret rooms in their villas, hidden behind painted panels or sliding walls, so that certain activities could vanish the instant a prying eye entered. Historians still argue whether these architectural tricks were commonplace or rare eccentricities, but surviving examples suggest that secrecy was built into the very foundations of some homes. You sense the tension, the constant awareness that any indulgence tonight might be tomorrow's scandal. Gossip spreads faster than wine, and reputations crumble quicker than marble. Even emperors weren't safe. Rumors of their excesses often circulated as whispered satire, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes not. The shadow of exposure hangs over the revelry like incense smoke, and yet that danger only heightens the thrill. To slip past social boundaries, to indulge in what must remain hidden, is itself intoxicating. You see it in the eyes of your fellow guests, the sharp gleam of people who know they are crossing a line but do it anyway. The masks aren't just props, they are shields against judgment, even self-judgment. You sip your diluted wine, listening as one guest loudly recounts his piety at the temple earlier in the day. He boasts of offering incense, of praying for Rome's prosperity. Around him, others nod solemnly, though you saw him earlier slip dice into his toga after winning a fortune in secret bets. Respectability by daylight, indulgence by torchlight. Historians still debate whether these contradictions were condemned universally or tolerated as part of the social fabric. Satirists mocked hypocrisy, but evidence suggests many Romans accepted it as the price of balancing public order with private release. Everyone wore two faces, one for the forum, another for the feast. You can't help but smirk. Isn't that still true now? The perfect photos, the polished speeches, the curated appearances, and then the late-night confessions, the mistakes hidden in shadows. Rome feels less like a distant empire and more like a mirror tilted toward your own world. A servant clears a platter of figs and you lean back, feeling the tension settle like heavy fabric across the room. Respectability and excess, two sides of the same coin, flipping endlessly in the candlelight. Tonight, you've landed firmly on the indulgent side. But when dawn comes and sandals slap against marble on the way back to the forum, the coin will flip again. You sigh, mask warm against your skin, and think, maybe that's the real Roman genius, not aqueducts or roads, but the ability to live two lives at once, and convince yourself both are true. The tension of respectability still hangs in the air, but before it can sour the mood, a hush ripples through the atrium. Someone claps twice, and servants glide forward, carrying small trays not of food, but of offerings. The revelry pauses, not stops, but shifts, as everyone turns their attention to ritual. At the center of the room, near a small household shrine, a brazier flickers to life. The host rises, toga carefully arranged, and pours a splash of wine onto the coals. The liquid sizzles, sending up a fragrant steam that mingles with rose oil and incense. The gesture is simple, almost casual, yet the effect is profound. For a moment, the feast belongs not just to mortals, but to the gods. You watch as fruits are placed beside the flames, figs, pomegranates, grapes plucked straight from their vines. A tray of honey cakes follows, their sweetness meant to lure divine favor. The symbolism is clear, pleasure and abundance offered back to the powers that made them possible. A quirky tidbit, some Romans believed even small offerings could ward off misfortune, so a host might toss a few nuts or coins into the fire before pouring the next round of wine. Imagine tossing pocket change into your candle before dessert, just to keep the gods happy. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincere acts of devotion or simply social performance, but their ubiquity suggests both motives overlapped. You feel the shift in atmosphere. Guests bow their heads slightly, not in solemnity exactly, but in respect. Even those who just moments ago shouted dice rolls or whispered scandals now extend their hands toward the smoke as if to gather some of its blessing. The gods are present again, not only on the frescoed walls, but in the crackle of flame, the sweet-smelling haze curling upward toward the rafters. Someone murmurs a prayer to Bacchus, asking for wine without headache. Another mutters something to Venus, half a plea, half a joke. The room relaxes as laughter returns, but the ritual remains a reminder. Indulgence without acknowledgement of the divine feels dangerous, incomplete. You close your eyes briefly and let the incense sting your nose. The sweetness cloying, the smoke wrapping around your throat. It's a sensory reminder that every Roman pleasure was tied, however loosely, to ritual. The boundaries between sacred and profane blur again. What begins as prayer ends as play. Historians still debate the sincerity of these offerings, whether Romans believed the gods truly partook of the figs and wine, or whether it was more symbolic theater to justify their feasts. Watching the solemn host raise his cup to the flames, you sense both. The ritual sanctifies the pleasure, and the pleasure validates the ritual. As the brazier crackles lower, the trays vanish again, and the music swells back into motion. Guests return to their couches, dice resume clattering, and laughter blooms once more. But the faint scent of incense lingers, a ghostly reminder that even in their wildest nights, the Romans rarely forgot to nod toward heaven. You sip your wine again, tasting smoke on the rim of your cup, and think, maybe the gods enjoy a good party as much as mortals do. The incense haze still lingers in your nose when a servant sets down a new tray near your couch. Not figs or roasted meat this time, but a collection of tiny cups filled with odd-smelling brews. You lift one, sniff cautiously, and nearly cough at the mix of herbs, honey, and something sharp you can't quite name. Around you, guests grin knowingly. This isn't just wine, it's medicine, or at least what the Romans believed passed for it. The Romans had a long tradition of mixing food, drink, and cures, blurring the lines between potion and pleasure. Tonight is no different. Some cups hold sweet honeyed syrups meant to soothe throats strained from laughter. Others gleam with greenish herbs, mint, fennel, maybe even wormwood, brewed to settle stomachs already rebelling against too much peacock and pastry. And then there are the more mysterious concoctions, whispered to stir the blood, sharpen desire, or banish fatigue before dawn. One quirky tidbit, Pliny the Elder described a supposed aphrodisiac made from rocket, arugula, mixed with pine nuts and honey. Imagine being told your salad was medicine for passion. It might explain why Romans treated the kitchen like a pharmacy. Historians still argue whether these remedies actually worked or whether belief alone made them potent. You take a cautious sip. The liquid is bitter at first, then cloying with honey, then bitter again. It coats your tongue like syrup, leaving a strange warmth in your chest. Around you, others swallow their doses with exaggerated expressions, grimaces, shudders. Then laughter, as though the discomfort itself is part of the entertainment. The talk shifts to stories of exotic ingredients. Crocodile dung once rumored as a contraceptive. Spanish fly whispered to spark uncontrollable passion. Ground pearls dissolved in wine said to restore vitality. Some guests swear by these secrets, while others roll their eyes and mock the gullibility of anyone desperate enough to believe. You suspect both groups will drink whatever's handed to them anyway. The brazier of incense is still glowing faintly, and the combined scents, herbal, smoky, sweet, make the room feel like a temple crossed with an apothecary. You feel lightheaded, but whether from the drink or the suggestion, you can't tell. The placebo effect might be the most Roman medicine of all. One guest, emboldened by his potion, leaps up to demonstrate its supposed power, striking a heroic pose. His friends laugh and cheer, while another quietly mutters that in a few hours he'll probably be curled in the corner regretting both potion and peacock. Historians still debate whether Romans truly believed these mixtures worked or whether they were mostly ritual, a way of convincing oneself that desire or stamina could be summoned with the right herbs. Either way, the act of drinking together, of toasting with medicine as much as with wine, becomes another shared performance. You tip back your cup and finish the last of the syrup. It leaves your lips sticky, your throat buzzing faintly, your imagination even buzzier. Was it a cure, a curse, or just honey with ambition? You'll only know when the night stretches longer, and you find yourself reaching for another tray. For now, you recline again, sticky-fingered and bemused, watching as others clamor for seconds, convinced they've swallowed courage, stamina, or love itself in liquid form. Maybe the Romans didn't need their medicines to work perfectly. Maybe all they needed was the hope that they might. The syrup still clings to your tongue, a strange blend of herbs and honey when a sudden commotion erupts near the peristyle garden. Heads turn, goblets pause in midair, and you crane your neck to see what's happening. The answer comes with a flutter of feathers and a shriek loud enough to silence even the drunkest poet. Exotic animals have entered the party. First, a pair of peacocks strut across the marble, their iridescent tails dragging like royal capes. The crowd applauds as if they've been waiting all night for such an entrance. One guest throws a grape, and the bird pecks it up with regal disdain. Romans adored peacocks, sometimes as delicacies, sometimes as decoration, always as a flex of wealth. Tonight, they seem more like fashion models, shimmering under torchlight. Then comes the chaos. A monkey on a leash scrambles across the couchbacks, snatching a fig from a senator's hand before he can react. The room bursts into laughter as the monkey scampers up a column, chattering triumphantly with juice dripping down its chin. Servants scramble after it, their sandals slapping the floor, while the guests shout encouragement as if it's part of the show. A quirky tidbit. Some Roman banquets included not just peacocks and monkeys, but even crocodiles or leopards displayed in cages brought out like living ornaments. Imagine balancing your wine while a leopard paces behind bronze bars in the corner. Historians still argue whether such animals truly mingled with guests or whether writers exaggerated to emphasize decadence. The air fills with feathers, fur, and laughter. A woman squeals as a parrot perched on a servant's arm repeats a drunken curse it overheard earlier. Another guest, tipsy and bold, tries to imitate the bird, sending the table into hysterics. The animals add a layer of unpredictability to the night. It's one thing to gamble on dice or trade secrets behind masks, but quite another to dodge a goose intent on pecking at your sandals. You find yourself half laughing, half flinching, as a goat trotting through the doorway sniffs at the offerings left by the brazier. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Bacchus was often depicted with panthers, satyrs, and other wild companions. To populate the villa with creatures is to bring myth to life, to blur the line between banquet and bacchanal. It's both entertainment and ritual, indulgence and spectacle. The noise rises again as a servant finally wrestles the monkey down, only for it to leap free and land squarely on a guest's head. Wine sloshes, laughter explodes, and for a moment the villa feels more like a circus than a temple of luxury. Historians still debate whether these displays were meant purely to impress or whether they carried symbolic weight, reinforcing the host's power over nature and the exotic. To own a peacock or monkey was to command the empire's reach, proof that Rome could bring distant worlds into its dining room. You reach out cautiously as a peacock passes near, its feathers brushing your fingers like silk set aflame. The sensation is strange, almost surreal, luxury made alive, beauty with claws, and then, just as quickly as they arrived, the animals are coaxed back out. The room exhales, laughter settling, goblets lifted once more. The wine resumes its reign, but the memory lingers. For a few wild minutes, the villa wasn't just a feast hall. It was a jungle, a theatre, a temple of living symbols. You lean back, sticky with honey, buzzing from herbs, feathers still drifting in the air. The Romans, you realize, weren't content with food and drink alone. They wanted life itself, wild, unpredictable, untamed, paraded through their marble halls. The echoes of squawking birds and chattering monkeys fade, but you're left marveling at how the villa itself seems to pulse with the night's rhythm. The animals may come and go, yet the architecture remains, guiding, shaping, coaxing desire without a word. You realize the house is more than walls. It's a stage, carefully designed to choreograph pleasure. You drift away from your couch, sandals whispering across mosaic floors, and begin to wander. The atrium greets you first, its open skylight spilling moonlight onto a shallow pool. The sound of dripping water adds a steady heartbeat beneath the laughter. The space feels public, exposed, perfect for arrivals, entrances, first impressions. From there, corridors branch like veins, leading into darker, narrower passageways. You follow one and find yourself in a garden courtyard. Lanterns strung along columns, hedges casting long shadows. It feels secretive, intimate, a place for whispered confessions and quiet liaisons, far from the noise of dice and song. A quirky tidbit. Some villas included specially designed triclinium dining rooms with revolving doors or hidden alcoves, allowing hosts to control who mingled with whom. Imagine rearranging your dinner guests with a bit of architecture, as though pulling strings in a human puppet show. Historians still argue whether these innovations were common or rare extravagances, but the surviving floor plans hint at a deliberate shaping of social flow. You run your fingers along the frescoed walls, noticing how the artwork changes with the room's function. In one corner, Venus reclines in languid luxury, suggesting romance. In another, hunting scenes emphasize vigor and conquest. Even the ceilings participate, painted with starry skies or vine-laden trellises to blur indoors and outdoors, dream and reality. The architecture feels like a map of the human mind, open spaces for spectacle, shadowed corners for secrecy, winding halls for transition. You imagine guests drifting through, their moods subtly nudged by the design itself. No need for strict instructions, the villa whispers where to linger, where to hide, where to seek. You stumble upon a side chamber lit by only a single lamp. Cushions spill across the floor, their silk catching faint glimmers of light. It feels like a place designed not for feasting, but for what comes after, when the wine has loosened tongues and the masks have done their work. The space is both invitation and temptation, and you feel yourself drawn to its softness even as you hesitate at the threshold. You stumble upon a side chamber lit by only a single lamp. Cushions spill across the floor, their silk catching faint glimmers of light. It feels like a place designed not for feasting, but for what comes after, when the wine has loosened tongues and the masks have done their work. The space is both invitation and temptation, and you feel yourself drawn to its softness, even as you hesitate at the threshold. Historians still debate whether these hidden rooms were standard in villas or rare indulgences of the ultra-wealthy. Yet the surviving ruins of Pompeii reveal doorways leading into small, richly decorated spaces that don't quite fit any ordinary household function. Whatever their purpose, you can feel it now. Architecture as accomplice. Returning to the main hall, you notice how the lighting itself shapes the mood. Lamps cluster where laughter should be loudest, while darker corners invite secrets. The villa is alive, its marble veins carrying wine, its frescoed skin glowing under torchlight. It breathes with its guests, guiding their steps like a patient conductor. You recline once more, realizing that the Romans understood what modern hosts often forget. Walls can seduce as much as words, and a room can orchestrate desire without lifting a single goblet. You sip your wine, now tasting both herbs and smoke, and think, maybe the real master of this party isn't the host at all, but the villa itself, watching, shaping, luring. The villa exhales around you, its painted walls glowing in torchlight. But now another presence seeps into the night, one less tangible than frescoes or marble. As the laughter dips and rises again, you notice how often gods are named, praised, or even mocked in passing. The Romans may lounge half-naked with wine stains on their tunics, yet their deities sit invisibly at every couch. A servant passes with a tray of figs, and a guest plucks one, holding it aloft before popping it in his mouth. "For Ceres," he says with a smirk, as though the goddess of grain deserves her tithe in jest. Across the room, another raises his goblet and toasts Bacchus, the wine god who clearly holds the night's leash. The atmosphere feels less like a secular feast and more like a theatre in which the gods are both audience and characters. The frescoes reinforce this impression. Venus reclines in painted splendor above the couches, her gaze angled just so, as if appraising the couples below. Cupid hovers mischievously, bow at the ready. You half expect him to loose an arrow and watch real guests stumble into sudden attraction. A quirky tidbit. Some hosts employed actors or servants dressed as gods to mingle during banquets, blurring fantasy and ritual. Imagine sharing grapes with a man painted blue, pretending to be Neptune. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or extravagant spectacle, but a few surviving masks suggest the tradition had some foothold. As music swells, a flute player shifts into a hymn-like melody and the chatter quiets again. A guest stands, reciting a verse to Mars, not in prayer exactly, but in half-ironic bravado, as though courage could be borrowed for the night. Laughter follows, but the invocation sticks. You sense how casually the divine is woven into revelry, never fully absent, never entirely solemn. The gods serve multiple roles, excuses for indulgence, Venus wills it. Guardians against excess, Jupiter will strike you for wasting wine, and even scapegoats when dice roll poorly. You hear a man groan at his losing streak and curse Mercury, accusing the trickster of rigging the game. His companions howl with laughter, but none contradict him. Historians still debate whether these invocations reflected true belief or playful performance. Did Romans genuinely feel Bacchus leaning over their shoulders, or was it all theatre? You suspect both. Belief and play blend seamlessly here, just as smoke and incense blur air and imagination. You take another sip, eyes drawn upward to the painted ceiling, vines curling around mythical scenes. The line between human feast and divine ritual has dissolved. The gods are here, whether in fresco, song, or joke, and their presence shapes the night as much as the architecture itself. Leaning back, you feel the marble cool against your elbow, the wine warm in your chest, and you wonder if Bacchus is indeed whispering, if Venus is indeed watching. Whether true or not, the thought is enough to make the party shimmer with a layer of sacred mischief. The laughter swells again, but you notice how voices overlap, sometimes colliding like cymbals in a drunken orchestra. A senator argues loudly about politics, while nearby a poet recites lines no one quite hears, and in the corner dice clatter against bronze. It isn't chaos exactly, it's layering. Conversation itself becomes a kind of performance, a way for Romans to assert wit, status, or charm under the dim torchlight. You lean closer to catch a group debating the latest gossip from the forum. A certain magistrate's mistress, they say, has been spotted sneaking into gladiator quarters. The story spreads across couches in a matter of moments, each retelling bolder than the last. Within minutes, the woman in question has been transformed from discreet lover to near-mythical seductress, capable of bringing Rome's laws to their knees. Nearby, a younger man boasts of his recent hunting trip, describing how he speared a boar with a single thrust. His listeners nod politely, though one mutters that he probably hired servants to do the killing. The group laughs. Status games disguised as storytelling, each word another coin tossed onto the pile of reputation. A quirky tidbit: Romans sometimes employed parasites, professional flatterers who earned their supper by praising the host and entertaining with wit. Imagine being paid not in cash, but in leftovers, your entire career hinging on your ability to keep conversation sparkling. Historians still argue whether parasites were truly common or mostly comic exaggerations, but surviving satire suggests that every party had at least one. The air hums with layers of talk: politics, love, poetry, insult. Even the silence carries meaning, as those who recline quietly signal mystery or disdain. You feel yourself swept into it, tossing in a comment here or there, laughing at a joke you half understand. The act of speaking becomes as intoxicating as the wine. One guest leans close and whispers a secret too scandalous to repeat aloud. The thrill isn't in the truth, it's in the exchange itself, the electric bond of conspiratorial breath. Secrets and lies intermingle, and you realize how much of Roman conversation was performance art, equal parts honesty and theatre. Historians still debate whether banquets were truly hotbeds of political intrigue or whether gossip here was mostly social currency, no more binding than dice throws. But as you recline among murmurs and laughter, you sense the double edge. Words spoken in play might by morning shape real reputations. The night stretches with sound, voices weaving like threads into a tapestry of ego and entertainment. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The gossip, the poetry, the boasts, the lies. It's as intoxicating as the wine itself, proof that for Romans, conversation was another luxury, another gamble, another way to sparkle under torchlight. The voices around you rise and fall like waves, and just when the tide of gossip feels ready to drown itself, a different energy sweeps through the room. Someone claps 3 times, and the musicians still their flutes. All eyes turn toward the atrium door, where a line of dancers appears, bare feet whispering against mosaic tiles. They move slowly at first, draped in gauzy fabrics that shimmer with each flicker of torchlight. Anklets chime, arms curve in fluid arcs, hips sway in rhythms both foreign and hypnotic. The crowd hushes, wine cups paused mid-air as though struck by a spell. The dance is more than entertainment. It feels ritualistic, each gesture deliberate, each step weaving myth into movement. One dancer twirls, lifting her veil to reveal eyes lined in kohl, her gaze sweeping across the audience with playful command. Another crouches low, then springs upward, mimicking the leap of a satyr chasing nymphs. The imagery is unmistakable. This is Venus and Bacchus brought to life through bodies. A quirky tidbit: Roman hosts often imported dancers from the East, especially from Syria and Egypt, to add exotic flair. Some performed acrobatics. Others specialized in pantomime, telling entire myths through gesture. Imagine Cirque du Soleil mixed with myth and more than a dash of flirtation. Historians still argue whether these performances leaned towards sacred ritual or pure spectacle, but their popularity is undisputed. The musicians return, flutes and drums quickening, and the dancers' movements shift. What was slow and sensuous becomes fevered and wild. Veils fall away, anklets rattle faster, the floor itself seems to tremble beneath stamping feet. Guests cheer, some rising from couches to mimic the steps, turning solemn ritual into shared frenzy. One dancer spins so quickly her veil detaches and drapes itself over a startled senator, who nearly spills his wine trying to free himself. Laughter erupts, but the rhythm carries on, relentless, irresistible. You feel your heart sinking with the beat, your breath shallow, your skin prickling as though the gods themselves are pushing the dancer's limbs. The performance blurs into worship, then into play. The divine and the human twine like vines climbing the same marble column. Historians still debate whether such performances were meant to provoke actual ecstasy or merely titillate the audience. Watching now, you suspect the answer lies in the overlap. Ecstasy and titillation aren't opposites here, they're partners in the same choreography. The dancers finish in a whirl of limbs and bells, collapsing gracefully to their knees. The room erupts in applause, coins tossed at their feet, wine splashing in salute. For a long moment afterward, the air still quivers with rhythm, as though the dance continues in the guests' very veins. You sink back into your couch, wine buzzing in your head, the ghost of drum beats still thudding in your chest. Tonight, movement has become myth, and bodies have become temples. The dancers vanish behind a curtain, leaving the air buzzing with rhythm, But the Romans aren't ready to surrender to silence. A poet rises next, scroll in hand, his toga slipping from one shoulder in studied carelessness. He clears his throat, waits for the chatter to dip, then launches into a recitation. His voice rises and falls in measured cadence, lines unfolding about love and loss, about battles fought under distant suns, about women whose eyes burned brighter than Venus herself. The words curl into the rafters, carried by torchlight and wine fumes, and for a moment the room feels suspended, less like a party, more like a dream stitched with syllables. The guests murmur appreciatively, some nodding, some whispering quips to undercut the solemnity. Romans adored poetry but also delighted in mocking it, especially when the lines ran too long. One man mutters something about the poet's voice sounding like a goat, and his friends collapse into muffled laughter. Still, no one leaves. Even mockery proves the performance has captivated them. A quirky tidbit. Some Roman banquets hosted impromptu contests where poets battled one another with verses, a kind of ancient slam poetry night. The losers might be pelted with nutshells or denied their next cup of wine. Historians still argue whether these competitions were serious or playful. But anecdotes suggest the line blurred. Praise could make a career. Ridicule could end one. The poet continues, shifting now into bawdier verses, sly jokes about Venus and Mars, puns that hinge on double meanings, metaphors stretched to wink at the audience. Laughter rises, genuine this time. You catch yourself chuckling, even though you only half understand the wordplay. The cadence itself seduces, each line falling like a splash of wine against marble. When he finishes, applause ripples through the room, though mixed with jeers and playful boos. The poet bows deeply, soaking in both praise and mockery as though they're equally nourishing. And perhaps they are. To be noticed is to matter, even if the attention comes with laughter. Another performer takes his place, a lyre player strumming quicksilver notes, plucking melodies that ripple through the wine haze. Guests hum along, some tapping fingers against bronze cups. The music blends with the poetry still echoing in your mind, until words and notes fuse into one long incantation. Historians still debate whether these performances were mere diversions or carried genuine cultural weight. After all, Rome's greatest poets often first recited in dining halls like this, where applause could turn into patronage. You suspect the truth is both, art as entertainment, entertainment as art, all tangled in the glow of lamplight and laughter. You recline once more, head heavy, thoughts slipping between lyric and rhythm. Around you, guests still debate the poet's best lines, still mimic his gestures, still hum the melodies. For all the excess of the night, peacocks, perfumes, dice. It's the words and music that seem to linger deepest, sinking like ink into the parchment of memory. The echoes of poetry still hum in your ears when a different sound rises from the far end of the hall, not the steady strum of a lyre or the measured verse of a poet, but something sharper, rowdier. Two men spring to their feet, tossing aside their cups, and begin to spar, not with fists, but with words. The guests lean forward instantly. This is no performance on the scroll, this is improv, and it's delicious. The insults start playfully. One mocks the other's hair, comparing it to a mop dragged through olive oil. The crowd snickers. The other shoots back, claiming his rival's toga must have once belonged to his grandmother's tablecloth. Laughter erupts, and the air crackles like static. Then it escalates. The men pace in circles, flinging jabs about cowardice in war, about stinginess at the dice table, about questionable encounters behind bathhouse curtains. The crowd howls, pounding couches, slapping thighs. The wit is quick, sharp as a dagger, but coated in honey. You realize this is more than comedy. It's a sport, a duel where reputation is the prize. A quirky tidbit. Romans adored satirical mime performances at banquets, where actors ridiculed politicians, gods, and even the audience itself. Unlike tragic theatre, mime allowed improvisation, crude jokes, and direct mockery. Historians still argue whether these banquet versions were professional acts or just drunken friends taking the stage. But either way, satire was a Roman specialty. One of the sparring men imitates a senator's pompous walk, puffing his chest and staggering as though wine had turned him into Jupiter himself. The crowd roars, some nearly choking on their grapes. Someone shouts for him to do the emperor, and though he hesitates, the temptation proves irresistible. He throws on a crown of leaves, raises a goblet, and mimics imperial decrees so outrageously that even the host buries his face in his hand to hide his grin. Historians still debate how dangerous such mockery could be. A wrong audience, the wrong emperor, and what seems like harmless parody could easily lead to exile, or worse. Yet here, within villa walls, the risk adds spice to the laughter. The duel continues until one of the men collapses onto a couch, wheezing with laughter, unable to keep up. The other raises his arms in victory, basking in applause and mock chants of triumph, as though he's just returned from conquering Gaul. The loser accepts his fate with exaggerated bows, milked for one final laugh. The room buzzes with energy, the tension of earlier debates dissolved in humor. Even serious-faced senators chuckle, wine sloshing down their beards. Satire binds the guests together, mockery as shared language, laughter as equalizer. You recline again, cheeks sore from grinning, and realize that for Romans, ridicule wasn't just cruelty. It was lubrication, a way to keep conversation lively, to sharpen minds dulled by wine, to remind everyone, even emperors, that no toga was beyond a good laugh. The hall still buzzes with laughter from the satire duel when the energy takes another sharp turn. A low beat rumbles from a drum, steady and primal, and the room hushes in anticipation. Into the silence steps a small troupe, masked performers clad in bright fabrics, their faces hidden behind exaggerated expressions of comedy and tragedy. You realize the night is far from done. The Romans have saved their most dramatic amusements for when the wine runs deepest. The performance begins with pantomime. One actor strides in, chest puffed, playing the role of a swaggering general. Another follows as the fickle goddess Fortuna, spinning a wheel fashioned from wood and bronze. Without words, the story unfolds. The general rises to glory, only to stumble, mocked by fortune's sudden reversal. The exaggerated gestures make the plot unmistakable, and the guests laugh knowingly. Romans adored pantomime for exactly this reason. It was loud, clear, and universal, even for those too drunk to follow dialogue. A quirky tidbit. Some pantomime dancers were so famous in Rome they attracted fan bases akin to modern celebrities. One, named Pylades, was said to provoke riots when audiences quarreled over his artistry. Imagine your favorite actor sparking literal street fights just by raising an eyebrow mid-performance. Historians still argue whether pantomimes were considered high art or lowbrow entertainment, but their popularity at feasts is undeniable. As the general collapses in exaggerated defeat, another performer bounds on stage, a satyr with goat legs fashioned from fur and stilts. He chases a veiled nymph who coyly eludes him until Venus herself appears, commanding both into harmony. The play is bawdy, mythic, and hilarious all at once. The crowd hoots, some rising from couches to cheer the satyr as if he were a gladiator in miniature. Masks amplify the effect. One grotesque grin stretches wide, the painted lips frozen in permanent mischief. Another mask scowls so fiercely it looks almost alive in the flickering torchlight. You shiver, realizing how effective these props were, not just to conceal identity, but to magnify character, to make emotions larger than life. The troupe closes with a short farce, mocking local politicians with such thin disguises that everyone in the room recognizes the targets. Guests howl with glee, some pounding the mosaic floors with fists, others wiping tears from their eyes. Even the host shakes with laughter, though you suspect he's also calculating whether this performance might circle back to him one day. Historians still debate whether these after-dinner theatricals served as social critique or mere diversion. Watching the room now, you sense both. The guests laugh, yes, but they also nod, exchange glances, mutter comments. The stage becomes a mirror, and for a moment, the absurdities of power, love, and fortune feel safely exposed under the veil of comedy. Historians still debate whether these after-dinner theatricals served as social critique or mere diversion. Watching the room now, you sense both. The guests laugh, yes, but they also nod, exchange glances, mutter comments. The stage becomes a mirror, and for a moment, the absurdities of power, love, and fortune feel safely exposed under the veil of comedy. When the masks finally bow, the room erupts in applause, coins clinking against the floor as tips scatter. The performers gather them quickly, disappearing into the shadows as though they'd never been. Yet the echo of their laughter remains, mingling with the smoke, the wine, and the memory of myth made flesh. You sink deeper into your couch, head spinning, not just from drink, but from the sheer kaleidoscope of entertainments. Rome doesn't just feast, it devours every art form, mixing poetry, dance, satire, and theatre into one sprawling banquet of the senses. The echoes of masks and laughter fade, but the night does not soften. Instead, it sharpens into something stranger, darker. The torches burn lower, their light stretched into elongated shadows across the frescoed walls. Music slows to a pulsing hum, steady like a heartbeat. You realize you've crossed into the late phase of the feast, the hour when inhibitions slough away and the party drifts closer to ritual than entertainment. A guest calls for the lamps to be dimmed. Another whispers for more wine, stronger this time, mixed with herbs that tint it almost black. The servants comply without question. As goblets circulate, masks appear again. Some guests tie them on, hiding their faces behind grins, frowns, or grotesque features. The effect is eerie. Familiar voices now float from unfamiliar faces, laughter detached from identity. You watch as couples peel away into alcoves, their movements half concealed by shadows and veils. The villa, which earlier felt like a theatre, now feels like a labyrinth, each hallway swallowing secrets. A flute begins to wail softly, its notes winding like smoke, adding an otherworldly shimmer to the atmosphere. A quirky tidbit. Some Roman cultic feasts blurred into true mystery rites, particularly those honouring Bacchus, where initiates swore secrecy about what happened in the torchlit hours. Ancient writers hinted at wild ecstasies, but never recorded them fully, leaving us to imagine the boundaries between play and worship. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were exaggerations by moralizing critics or glimpses of genuine nocturnal rituals. You feel the change physically. The wine hits heavier. The air grows thicker. The torchlight feels alive, flickering like watchful eyes. Someone chants softly near the brazier, invoking Bacchus in a half-joking, half-solemn murmur. Others join in, laughter mixing with reverence until it's impossible to tell which dominates. The masks add to the dreamlike blur. A man in the face of tragedy whispers confessions he'd never admit barefaced. A woman in a grotesque grin dances slowly, her silhouette bending with the shadows until she looks more spirit than mortal. You sense how anonymity frees them, how the masks allow truths or fantasies to slip free. Historians still debate whether what happened in these final hours was pure indulgence or deeply spiritual. The accounts we have veer between scandalized outrage and wistful nostalgia. But standing here, wine buzzing in your skull, shadows crawling up painted gods, you feel the mingling of both. It's not simply decadence, it's communion, messy and mystical. The villa has transformed. It is no longer a dining hall nor a stage, but a liminal space, a threshold between human and divine, pleasure and ritual, dream and reality. You recline deeper into your couch, senses thick with incense, wine and whispers, wondering if the night has tipped into myth, or if myth has finally revealed itself as nothing more than the night. The night has grown heavy now, thick with incense and shadows, yet it clings stubbornly to life. The torches sputter low, but goblets are still raised, dice still rattle faintly, and soft laughter threads the smoky air. You recline deeper into your couch, aware that the feast has entered its final stretch, the slow unraveling that comes before dawn. Servants pad quietly through the hall, gathering emptied trays, sweeping scattered nutshells, refilling cups only when beckoned. Their movements are almost invisible, ghost-like in the dim glow. Around you, the energy has shifted from frenzy to murmur, from spectacle to reflection. Conversations that earlier soared with satire and gossip now sink into softer tones. Guests lean closer, voices hushed, words heavy with wine. A guest nearby begins a tale of his youth, recalling campaigns fought under Caesar's banner, his words thick but sincere. Others nod, some dozing, some still listening with half-shut eyes. Memory has replaced performance. The night has turned inward. A quirky tidbit. Roman feasts sometimes ended with philosophical debates, where even the most inebriated guests tried their hand at discussing fate, virtue, or the meaning of pleasure. Imagine slurring your way through Stoicism after 12 cups of wine. Historians still argue whether these late-night discussions were genuine attempts at wisdom or just drunken rambling elevated in hindsight. The brazier at the shrine smoulders low, sending up one last thread of fragrant smoke. Someone murmurs another offering to Bacchus, but the words trail off, swallowed by fatigue. The gods, like the guests, seem drowsy now. You feel the weight of marble under your elbow, the softness of cushions against your back, the taste of stale honey still clinging to your tongue. Around you, masked faces slip away, veils discarded, secrets dissolving back into silence. The revelry is fading, leaving only exhaustion, warmth, and the faint hum of torchlight. Historians still debate how these parties truly ended, whether with sudden collapse into sleep, with hushed dispersal into the night, or with quiet rituals of closure. Watching now, you see fragments of all three, some guests nodding off where they recline, others stumbling toward the door, still others whispering farewells with lingering hands. The villa breathes slower, its marble arteries emptying, its frescoed gods watching the final ebb of humanity with painted calm. You rise at last, weaving through cushions and shadows, stepping carefully over dice forgotten on the floor. The air outside is cool, the stars sharp after the haze of lamps and incense. The city of Rome still sleeps, unaware of the revels hidden behind villa walls. And as you step into the dawn, you realize what you've witnessed wasn't just indulgence. It was theater, ritual, power, and dream stitched together in one long night. A night Rome never truly forgot.